you. So my name is Kian, this is Laura, and we are both AmeriCorps members serving with Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground program. Conservation Nebraska's mission is to protect our state's natural legacy by educating the public, supporting communities, and increasing civic engagement, which we accomplish through locally led education efforts and community engagement projects to address local conservation concerns. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I have a few housekeeping rules to go over. So for the people who are joining online, just know that your cameras are off and you will be muted throughout the presentation. So please type any questions that you have into the chat or to the Q&A section, and we will get those answered as we go, either at the end or throughout, whichever you prefer. And then for both in-person and online attendees, we will have a very brief survey at the end that shouldn't take longer than 2 to 3 minutes. And this survey helps support programming like this one, so we appreciate everybody's time to fill those out. Turn it over to you.
Tonight, we're learning about fall tree care, sustainable landscapes, and more with Justin Evertson. Justin is the Green Infrastructure Coordinator for the Nebraska Forest Service and Nebraska Statewide Arboretum and has been working with them since 1990. Justin is an expert on trees and sustainable landscaping, and he values native landscapes, biodiversity, and sustainability. We are very happy to have Justin presenting with us tonight. Let's take it away, Justin.
All right, awesome.
Thanks for being here.
Happy to be here. Where did you dig all that up? Was it online or did I?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, guys. That was a great introduction. I'm happy to be here. I'm the Green Infrastructure Coordinator for the Nebraska Forest Service and the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. And that whole green infrastructure title thing may not mean a whole lot right now, but we'll touch on green infrastructure here in just a minute when we get the program rolling. So that'll mean more to you. Mostly I'm a resident tree hugger. I love trees. I really do. I grew up in western Nebraska where trees are few and far between, but I've been working in eastern Nebraska my adult life. So 40 years now helping plant and care for trees in eastern Nebraska. And I've just grown to love them. I think they make our lives so much better. I could be in trees every day, to be honest with you. Yesterday, we were traipsing around the woods south of Nebraska City on the Steamboat Trace Trail to find some rare trees. And so that's where I love to be. And I think that there's a method of bringing those trees to our communities, doing it right so that trees do better for us. And that's really what my role is at the Nebraska Forest Service and the Statewide Arboretum. I brought a few props to share. I don't know if you can see this online very well, but I just want to quickly say, hey, we're Nebraska, we're prairie country. We're going to talk about this a little bit, but we have some really cool trees here in Nebraska. This is a seed of a shagbark hickory. These were falling from the trees that were in vivid yellow colors just yesterday down there around Nebraska City. If you go out to my home country of Kimball County, far western Kimball County, right where Nebraska meets Wyoming, you'll run into some really neat trees. The limber pine. This is a limber pine cone. Believe it or not, limber pines in the Pine Bluffs area of western Kimball County date to over 600 years old. They survive sometimes, I think, on just dust and bird poop because it is dry in that part of the world. It's dry here, but it's dry there all the time. These are two cones from Kimball County, trees growing in town in Kimball. These are pinyon pine cones, and they love dry, almost arid country of Colorado and New Mexico, places like that. But they produce a nut in here, or a seed that's like a nut that you and I can eat. We can grow those in western Nebraska almost as a cash crop, and they bring birds, different types of jays and the pinyon nutcracker to western Nebraska. We don't see them in other parts of Nebraska. Here's a fun tree to talk about. This is the Kentucky coffee tree seed. Kentucky coffee tree is a easy to grow legume tree that's native to eastern Nebraska. Inside this seed pod is a hard seed, and these seed pods are hanging off the trees right now. They will fall down late winter or early spring off the tree. And these seeds hearken to a time long before we humans were on the North American continent, because these seeds are anachronistic. They are out of place in time. The animals that evolved to eat these seeds are long gone. We're talking about the mammoths and the mastodons and rhinoceroses and gomphotheres And who knows what was running around Nebraska at the last ice age? Isn't that cool that these trees still hang on in our landscapes? Here's one of my favorite nuts. This is a bur oak acorn. Look at that, it fits almost in the palm of my hand. A bur oak grows across Nebraska, and I'm gonna show you some pictures. We've been gathering acorns this fall for production through the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum for distribution across the state. But this acorn came from southeast Nebraska, and we gathered acorns of bur oak up in northwest Nebraska just a couple weeks ago. And those two populations of oaks are saying, hey, Nebraska, we've got some pretty cool native trees for you to be growing in your landscapes. So even though it's hot, horribly droughty and problematic, there are many great trees to plant and use in our landscapes. And we're going to talk about that just a little bit tonight. And I mentioned to you once or twice already, it's hot and it's dry. I normally love fall, the time of year when harvest is going on, the fall colors are blossoming, cool nights and all of that. What happened this year? Oh my God, I don't know what's going on. Every other day is 90 degrees. It's windy, it's bright and sunny. It's great to be outside, but we haven't had a spit of rain, have we, for a few months? And my joke is even the dust has dust this year, so it's pretty bad. And it's going to be a tree killer probably to some of our trees that aren't well cared for. But as bad as this drought is, these trees that grew up in our part of the world, they tolerate this kind of a climate. And they're giving us clues to say, hey, plant more of me. We can do this. We're going to talk about it here tonight in the program. I might have to look at the slides that I'm.
Yes, yeah, I was just about to ask you if you wanted me to switch
Okay.
over.
We're going to get the PowerPoint program going and kill you with PowerPoints. But we're going to try and have fun with this. I put in 85 slides. So that sounds like a 2-hour program. But once we get through some of the worst of these text slides, we're going to fly through some cool examples of plants, landscapes, and things to think about. If anybody has a question, type it in and we can answer them as we go along. If you get them, just let me know. And
Okay, I think we actually do have one already if you want.
all right, what's the first question?
Let me find it. Right here.
Are limber pines susceptible to pine wilt? We had 2 in the Arboretum and lost one. Bob Fear. Hey, Bob Fear in North Bend. It's good to hear from you. Bob has a wonderful Arboretum, the Franklin Cotterill Greens at North Bend. If you guys are ever in the North Bend area, stop and see his Arboretum around the high school. It is just fantastic. And he's probably tried every tree and shrub you can think about. We talked about limber pine, Bob. It is not prone to pine wilt. In eastern Nebraska, I would say it's prone more to just humidity problems and maybe rust diseases on the foliage in our wet periods. But I've planted a few limber pine around and they do pretty good. Wherever you plant limber pine in eastern Nebraska, give them well-drained soil. Don't put them in an irrigated landscape and give them plenty of room to breathe so the air flows through them. That's my best advice. When you get into western Nebraska, they can take irrigated sites a little more, but they always prefer full sun and maybe a little wind throw around them. So give them some gaps if that makes sense. Maybe I'll have a picture and I'll show you the state champion limber pine in the Kimball City Park. It's 5 feet tall with a trunk this big around. They dug it out of the woods in western Kimball County 80 or 90 years ago, and they put a patch of them in the park, and they're fantastic. Now they're shade trees in the Kimball Park, so limber pine for sure. We'll see if this is going to advance this. Clicker, do I need to turn it on?
It doesn't work?
Click, click, click. It worked earlier.
I don't know.
I might have to click the other side.
It's not doing anything. I have a clicker too. Do you want me to give you that to try? Technical difficulty.
Otherwise, if you want to just say next slide, I could also switch them, unless you,
I prefer to click if it'll work.
it's totally fine.
How did you do that? No, hope it worked. All right, it's working now.
Perfect.
She just had to touch it. She's got the magic touch. Okay, we're going to talk about resilient and sustainable landscapes. And I apologize for these text slides. when you do a PowerPoint, they say, do not put a lot of text on your slides. Well, I have 3 of them here that are nothing but text. So I didn't get the memo, but I think this is good stuff to think about. So I'm just gonna read it to you as we pop these up. How can we strike a better balance in developing our community landscapes, maximize shade, wildlife, habitat, energy conservation, water conservation, stormwater retention, walkability, safety, and a sense of place and beauty? This presentation will explore some of those ideas for doing that. That's a lot we're trying to solve with our community landscapes, isn't it? And we want them to look good, we want them to function well, but we have all these other things we'd like to have come along with it. That's our role at the Nebraska Forest Service and Statewide Arboretum. What am I doing wrong, Laura?
Try the other side.
Click, I'm guessing it might be out of battery. Where is the receiver? Where's the computer?
Is it this?
I might just need to keep. Next slide. See if you can get my. We don't want to have to say next slide the whole time.
Yeah, you want me to go to the next slide for now?
Go to the next slide. All right. So I'm the Green Infrastructure Coordinator. We just talked about that a minute ago. Here's what green infrastructure is, or the value of it. The value of green infrastructure is the collective. Green infrastructure is the collective green spaces of a community utilized to meet several beneficial outcomes, including these things. Stormwater management is the big one that we think about in cities, using trees and landscapes to capture and absorb and slow stormwater so we're not running off pollutants into the local tributaries. Tree canopy, all that good shade for a lot of things, including stormwater management, shade and cooling, energy conservation, wind blocking, and all those things we love trees for. And here's a big one I want to point out, mental and physical health. We're going to talk tonight and really try to hone in on this idea that if we do these landscapes right, they are really good for our mental and physical health. Probably the most important thing we're doing with these landscapes. Okay, functional green space and access to nature. That's part of the value of green infrastructure. And even that includes improved health outcomes, energy conservation and climate resiliency, local food production, and improved soil health. All of those things we're trying to do with the value of green infrastructure. Next slide, please. Here are kind of the broad goals that we see at the Nebraska Forest Service with the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum in terms of what we're trying to do with green infrastructure. We're trying to improve the tree canopy of our community forest. More trees, bigger canopy, capturing more stormwater runoff, giving us more shade and wind protection, and all the good things trees do. So we need more trees, better diversity, and better management. Biodiversity. When we plant our landscapes, we need to think if we're planting a plant and it does nothing to sustain biodiversity, doesn't attract any pollinators or insects or birds or other things, maybe that's not the right choice. Stormwater management, help capture, slow, and treat stormwater runoff. Water conservation, wow, that's a big, big issue now, especially in light of the recent drought that we've hit into. Here in eastern Nebraska, some of us are in now a 3-year drought cycle. It's one of the worst that I've seen in my life, and I've seen some pretty bad drought cycles. So we've got to think hard about water conservation. We got to rethink the lawn and the amount of water we put into the lawn. And then we should think about a better sense of place. We live on the Great Plains. This is prairie country, but we do have beautiful woodlands. How can we interpret that prairie and those woodlands into our landscapes? That's part of what we're trying to do. Yep, next slide. These are some programs I'll just mention briefly that the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum and the Nebraska Forest Service help coordinate to help our communities do this. I'm going to fly right through this, but you're going to get my contact information at the end here. Contact me anytime if you want to explore some of these cool things going on. First, there's IRA grant funding. The Nebraska Statewide Arboretum has over $9 million available to get out to communities to help with community forest improvements in underserved neighborhoods. There's other grant funds like Water-Wise Landscapes, Trees for Nebraska Towns, 10 free trees. I'm planting 10 free trees this weekend in Waverly. In Waverly is where I'm from. I work in the parks in Waverly, and we're going to plant 10 free trees. They were free. They came to me. They put them in my driveway. All I have to do is go work with my friends and neighbors to go plant them. Greener Nebraska Towns and plant grants. As a homeowner, you might be interested in bloom boxes. We'll ship you a box of native plants to get you started into kind of the idea of utilizing native landscapes in your own yard, in your own neighborhood. Affiliated Arboretum sites, there are over 100 Arboretums across Nebraska. We work with them to say, hey, try this. Hey, tell us what's working. Hey, here's some money to help you do this. We can help you with signage. Come to a conference, show off your Arboretum. Lots of people work together to make those places better. The UNO campus is an affiliate site of the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. That's where we're having the meeting tonight. Plant production and sales. If you're after native plants and you don't know where to go to find them, come to the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum in the spring and summer, and our greenhouse sales every Friday. Bob Hendrickson grows all these wonderful plants. You can buy them and take them home and plant them. And then always, always education and outreach. That's what we're doing tonight. We're trying every day to do some of this stuff. Our community landscapes are often resource intensive, water inefficient, and not reflective of our place on the Great Plains. I have a spelling problem right there, spelling mistake, of our place on the Great Plains. Look at this picture, see these images. These landscapes are not necessarily ugly, of course, are they? But they are resource intensive, and they could be anywhere USA. You wouldn't know you're in Nebraska with some of these landscapes. To me, this is reflective of our innate desire for neat and tidiness. We humans, we might even go sweep the ground around our house if there's too much dust, or we might vacuum up every leaf on our lawn because we like the neat and tidy. It's within us. And we have to work at it a little bit to say, no, I'm going to push against that just a little bit and try to let my landscape reflect a little bit of what I call rough edges, or things that are just more sustainable and resilient in a conservation kind of an idea. Okay, we got to keep moving or we're going to not get through these slides. The first thing we need to address, though, when we think about what are we going to do with landscapes, there are a lot of environmental challenges we're dealing with. Habitat loss across the board, decreased biodiversity and increasing extinction rates. A changing climate. Oh my gosh, this climate is changing right before our eyes. Degraded and eroded soils, water issues, invasive species, herbicide damage, human apathy, and our disconnect from nature. We are disconnected from nature. We're on our phones a lot. As adults, I do it too. I better shut off my ringer. But boy, I like to check my messages. I was gonna say check my stock prices, but I don't have stocks, so. But we're looking at fun pictures of trees and talking to each other and have fun. And we're not outside enjoying what Mother Nature brings to us. So we gotta remember our kids love this stuff. Get them up into a tree, get them muddy, let them hunt for some bugs. It's telling us nature is just saying, right here is a playground and you don't need anything in this phone to have fun, to be outside. And if we recapture that, if we reinstill that in our population, maybe as we become adults, we put more value into the landscapes around us. That's what we're trying to convey. Okay, next. Part of this issue about disconnect from nature is pointed out in the way we love our lawns. We are neat and tidy. A lot of us, if we have a home, we like to grow the best golf course quality grass we can. And I'm the first to admit that, man, a lush carpet of grass is inviting. Wow, it really looks good around the house. I want it in my house too. But it takes a lot of resources to keep these things golf course quality. So look at the numbers. We have 40.5 million acres of lawn in this country, 30 billion a year in maintenance costs, And look at the water consumption we put out, 7 billion gallons a day on a hot summer day nationally. In Nebraska, that could be 300 million gallons of water we just threw out to the lawn. This is potable drinking water that we're putting on the lawn. And in Lincoln, where I work out of, 50 million gallons a day on a hot summer day. And they're pumping that water from the winnowing Platte River, pumping it 40 miles back to Lincoln, and then treating it to be drunk. And we're throwing it all out onto the ground. That doesn't make sense, does it? So 800 million gallons of gasoline, 3 million tons of fertilizer, 30,000 tons of pesticide, herbicide damage to trees and non-target landscapes the way we care for those landscapes. And we are sterilizing our landscapes in the name of our golf course quality lawns. Again, I love a green lawn. I do too. The green lawn isn't the problem. It's just all the inputs and the damage that comes along with it that we got to be aware of. So our planted landscapes, we believe this, can do much more to help sustain biodiversity and conserve natural resources. Where we can, we should utilize more native plants, and we're going to talk about that. But let me say right up front that in our community landscapes, not every spot, every place that we need to do some landscaping is a great spot for a native plant. There are a lot of non-native plants that fit the bill for what we're trying to do, but let's try to use more native plants in our community landscapes. E.O. Wilson said biological diversity is key to the maintenance of the world as we know it. Imagine that. We humans would not be around here if we didn't have biological diversity going on around us. So next. So here's 5 big suggestions for better landscape resiliency, and we'll go through these in the slides. Plant more trees. Please plant more trees. Sometimes it's almost that simple to make our communities more livable, especially large canopy trees. The right tree in the right place, properly planted and managed. Rethink the lawn, how we're going to do our lawns. Use the landscape to help capture, slow, and filter stormwater. Choose plants wisely. Try to use more native plants and strive for greater biodiversity. And then we've got a better say right here, exclude invasive non-native species. Just exclude those invasive turkeys, and then there's a million other plants to try. Then let's improve our soil health as we go along. So first of all, keep planting trees. From the Nebraska State Capitol, you look down on Lincoln. What do you see? A forest. That's the community forest. All those trees that we take for granted in the background of our daily lives. Wow, wow, wow. The service they're providing to not only our personal well-being, but across the community and stormwater capture and all the other benefits. We can't overstate that. Next slide, please. Time spent amongst trees is never wasted time. I love that quote. Here I have my grandson and now a granddaughter. I make them go out in the woods with me, whether they want to or not. A lot of times they're ready to play on the phone. Nope, we're going outside. We're going to traipse around in the woods. I believe that to my soul, that makes us more in tune to nature. So here's the value of one well-placed catalpa tree out in the city of Cozad. Cool summer shade at the southwest corner of this house. So just imagine how much more comfortable that house is. Up to $75 a year in energy savings, 1,200 gallons of stormwater captured every year to prevent runoff, 575 pounds of CO2 sequestered. These trees, a catalpa tree gets these big tropical flowers that are loaded with bees, other insects, and birds. Wouldn't you like to be a kid to be able to climb up a tree like that? And then the beauty and lifetime of pleasure. Trees are the cat's meow of our landscapes. They really are. Unfortunately, all is not well with our trees. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this today, but right now we're aware of number 1, climate and weather. It's tough to be a tree in Nebraska. It is. We lose a lot of trees just because of climate issues. Insects and diseases, invasive species, an aging and shrinking community forest canopy, lack of species diversity, lawn care issues, herbicide damage, nursery quality and availability, urban challenges, and number 10, human neglect and apathy. Species diversity, these are lessons not learned. This was supposed to be a slide that advanced over the top of this one. So here's a street in East Lincoln. I forget the neighborhood, but just like 3 years ago, or June 2019, the street was lined with green ash. Oh, maybe it will come up next. This is the neighborhood here. You can see all the ash trees in that picture. This neighborhood is cloaked in ash trees. Well, here comes emerald ash borer. Next slide, and we're gonna see what happened. That's the same street just 2 years ago. All those ash trees are gone. We've got to be more careful with the way we put trees out in our community because you don't want all your eggs in one basket. We're losing shade canopy in our cities across the state. Our Forest Service surveys show that 30–50% canopy loss since 1970. As the old trees go out of our communities and neighborhoods, people aren't anxious to replant them. They see a problem, they see a cost. And it costs $3,000 to $4,000 to take a tree down. Then you got leaves to rake. And so we hear all the time about the cost. People don't want them like they used to. And we're losing the canopy. This is Dutch elm disease that roared through Nebraska in the 60s and 70s. Think about this. The city of Lincoln took down 12,000 public trees over the last 5 years, and they maybe have planted 1,000 or 2 in that time. So we're going to lose that canopy. So we obviously we want more people to plant more trees. Well, what kind of trees are we going to plant? There are over 150 species that can be grown here. And we talked just a minute ago about some real winners for Nebraska if you want to go out and explore them. We don't have time to look at 150 species tonight, but the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum, get online. We have wonderful plant lists. I brought some of them with me tonight. Here's one, a few trees to plant more of with drought tolerance in mind, and I have 150 trees on this list. And then here's one, whoops, a few trees to plant more with drought tolerance in mind. I can read. And then native trees and shrubs of Nebraska. If you were in the audience, I'd say, does anybody know, a little trivia question, how many trees are native to Nebraska? If you had this list, you'd know that it's right around 50. We got to stretch that a little bit. Big growing trees that are common in Nebraska are maybe about 30 of them. But if you add some obscure species, we get up to about 50 native species in Nebraska. Okay, next slide. Here's 20 species when I give a tree program that I've been encouraging people to plant more of. I don't want to go through all of these in any detail, but let's just shout them out. Bur oak, chinkapin oak, shingle oak, gamble oak, coffee tree, triumph elm, David elm, hackberry, caddo sugar maple, American linden, pecan, bitternut hickory, Ohio buckeye, Turkish filbert, black cherry, serviceberry trees, bald cypress, the limber pine, Rocky Mountain Douglas fir, and ponderosa pine. Look at that, 20 trees to throw at you just off the top of my head, and there's 100 more we can talk about. But it's sometimes easier to just say what we shouldn't be planting, and that's the invasive species or overused species. Autumn blaze maple is easy to love this time of year. They shine a bright red even in a tough year like this. And they're not a bad tree, but they're overplanted. So be careful about planting too many of them. And then really be careful about this guy, the ornamental pear tree. They're an escape tree that's moving out across Nebraska, the Great Plains, and the Midwest. It's really becoming invasive and problematic. And then on the right is autumn olive, which is more of a big shrub than a tree, but I threw in here a list of things to avoid. And you can go to the Nebraska Invasive Species Program online, and they will have a list of plants to be aware of that you should not be planting because they're escaped problematic issues somewhere. So just start there. And then you've got all these other trees to plant. So keep planting and caring for trees. Plant more trees, the right tree in the right place, properly planted and managed. Help care for trees. We should be watering trees this time of year, this year, mulching and proper pruning. Emphasize native species and seed-grown trees. Exclude invasive, less scattering of trees. Be smart with lawn care. Improve sustained soil health around trees. Let's do it, people. We can do better by trees. Okay, another big topic. We were just talking about this before the presentation. The lawn. In parts of any big city where there's affluence, people are well-heeled. They love their lawns and they fuss over them. And again, it's not a bad thing to have a lush green lawn around yourself, but just think about the inputs. Well, here are some ways to maybe reduce inputs, to be more conservation-minded, and also have a beautiful landscape around you. Next picture. A lawn can be many things. Here we are in Nebraska. This was originally prairie country. Maybe you could turn your lawn into like just a little meadow of prairie or just parts of it. This landscape on the upper right, there's a mowed area in the middle, but a prairie-esque meadow around it. And this house on the left, look at those tall gay feathers. That's a tall grass prairie interpretation right in the middle of the city. It can be done. Talk to your neighbors, of course. They might not want a prairie right by them, but my hunch is most people are going to be like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. Look at all the butterflies and landscape happening there. Next slide. Now we'll just, whoops, maybe something got, I wonder if I gave you the wrong. This is fine though. We're going to go through. Oh, this is just the idea that you can do prairie grasses as a prairie border, like out here along the street in Alliance. This is blue grama. That's the native western Nebraska plant. Blue grama makes a good little meadow prairie. Right. Buffalo grass here on East Campus of the university. Be aware that buffalo grass is native here, but it prefers western Nebraska where we get less water, where there's less competition from weeds and other things like that. So it's not always as brilliant here in eastern Nebraska as the pictures make it look. You could do just an eco grass lawn where you, especially if you have some shade in your yard, you could, this is an eco grass mix that includes from Prairie Moon Nursery, sheep fescue, hard fescue, and other fescues. And then she lets that grow as a little meadow that maybe mows once or twice a year. A sedge lawn. Sedges are native in our forest understory. Here's a scene from a Nebraska woodland. Those are sedges on the carpet, on the ground plane underneath those trees. So it's saying, hey, put these in our landscape. Sedges are a lot like grasses, but they're generally a little more shade tolerant and wet tolerant. And there's all kinds of sedges that we can use for little meadow-esque plantings around our homes. And then my whole point is just the simplest solution of all is just relax and be more accepting of Mother Nature's handiwork. You could start with just a fescue lawn, throw out some Dutch white clover into that thing, and then maybe just see what Mother Nature does. It's okay to have clover, dandelions, a little bit of henbit, things like that. The world's gonna keep spinning. If they're in your lawn and you just go out and mow them, it's okay. Violets and plantain and black medic and things like that. If they tolerate mowing, that can be part of the lawn. I know that's hard for people to get their head wrapped around, but here's our park in Waverly where I plant trees and care for them, Wayne Park. There's mostly fescue grass in here. It never gets irrigation. It never gets fertilizer. All we do is mow it. Sometimes we have to go over the top and reseed it a little bit. But does that look like an unacceptable or an uninviting lawn? It can be done. A relaxed lawn approach, we call it a polyculture lawn, meaning that there's just several species in it. So here's some things to plant in a polyculture lawn. Dutch white clover, self-heal, yarrow, creeping thyme, wild petunia, bird's foot trefoil. And then we want some benign weeds that you can just say, you know what? They came uninvited, but I'm gonna let them be there. Wild violets, black medic, plantain, sorrel, knotweed, purslane, dandelions. Oh my God, don't let them have dandelions, henbit, spurge, ground ivy. After a while, with just a relaxed look at it, you'll be surprised at how no weed will probably dominate forever. Things are dynamic if you give them a chance. When we rethink weeds across the landscape, we got to remember that something we see as weeds like honeyvine milkweed, it is an important plant for monarch butterflies. Violets and fritillaries go together, and then even nettles, stinging nettles, are important plants for question marks and other butterflies. So if we have these kinds of weeds in our landscapes, we're actually doing good for biodiversity. I'm not telling you to accept every weed or every dandelion. I can't stand all the dandelions in my own lawn at my house. I get it. But let's just be careful with it and relax and think about it a little differently. And it's okay to put up with a few dandelions. Another thing we need to do in our landscapes is help capture and slow stormwater runoff by the use of rain gardens, bioretention plantings, porous pavement, and green roofs. Here's a rain garden. What's a rain garden doing? It's capturing that water coming off of your home or your landscape, putting it into a depression where it is allowed to slowly seep into the ground and replenish the aquifer and feed these plants that are growing near it, as opposed to letting it just run down the gutter out into the tributaries of our local streams, carrying all that pollution with it. Rain gardens are a simple solution to have a nice, colorful garden in the landscape and also help the cities you live in treat stormwater so it's not such a big problem to try and get rid of and treat. Here are a few landscape examples to get these ideas across. I always show this slide. We worked with Fireworks Restaurant in Lincoln many years ago, and we worked with the restaurant, the city of Lincoln, and the Natural Resources District to do a bioswell, a stormwater capture swell right next to the headwaters of Antelope Creek in Lincoln to help clean that stormwater coming off the parking lot of Fireworks Restaurant, capture it, filter it, slow it. Well, why not we do two things at once? Let's filter that stormwater and we'll use native plants to do that work. So it's prairie plants. Look at the brilliant color of these prairie plants that were in about 4 or 5 years after the planting. Fireworks Restaurant in Southeast Lincoln. We put trees and shrubs in there. 15 years later, the trees and the shrubs are dominating, but still many of these other prairie plants are still there, capturing and slowing that stormwater runoff as it ends up in the Antelope Creek tributary. And the Antelope Creek flows through the heart of Lincoln. It feeds Holmes Lake in the middle of Lincoln too, and so we want that water to be clean, so let's treat it as it comes along. How about the NSA display gardens? Back in 2009, we planted a bioswell where the water comes off a parking lot and heads into Dead Man's Run. There's Bob Hendrickson planting that in 2009. Yep, go ahead. So the stormwater just runs through this swale with tall grasses and sedges and other native prairie things, and it really does great work filtering the stormwater. Downtown Lincoln has put in many stormwater capture systems along their streets. This is on P Street downtown. Stormwater flows in, runs through these plants, is pooled for a little while, and then slowly is released. City of Omaha has done a lot of that too. Next slide. The Columbus Chamber of Commerce out in Columbus did a bioswale or a rain garden at the corner of their parking lot. Nebraska State Fairgrounds in Grand Island. Look at these examples. This is out in Scotts Bluff, where they've turned downtown parking lot islands into these pollinator magnets utilizing native plants and other things. Part stormwater capture, but mostly just the idea of getting green and color in downtown spaces that were mostly neglected for a long time. At the Scotts Bluff Library, water coming off the roof drains through a bioretention planting. And here at the ESU 13 in Scotts Bluff, a group of us planting bioretention swell a few years ago. Here's an example of how we often do, parking lots are all this pavement and a lot of stormwater runs off. They're not fun places to be. They lack trees, they lack green, they're hot, and all that stormwater is running off. Well, if you could build an island like this that you're gonna have to hot mowers up and the water cascades off of it like they've done in Scotts Bluff, or you could do something like they've done out at the Morton Arboretum in Lisle, Illinois, and you could use permeable pavement where the water soaks through, and then you can turn that from convex to concave, and you're going to capture stormwater in the middle of these parking lot islands as the water flows through. Nothing rolls out of these parking lots at Morton Arboretum. Okay, the next thing we want to talk about, we want our landscapes to have biodiversity emphasizing native plants. And here are just some of the benefits of landscape biodiversity and native plants, and I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this, but holy cow, greater diversity of wildlife, insects, birds, amphibians, reptiles, more pollinators and better pollination, stormwater absorption, and they just wanna be here. They're beautiful, wonderful plants if we learn to love them. Think about this, Nebraska's native landscape. We are right here smack dab in the middle of the country. If you look up, people are halfway to either Los Angeles or New York City, right? And they're looking down on us. We're right in the middle where we really are, where east meets west. The western Rocky Mountain influence from the Rocky Mountains meets its eastern extent on the Nebraska plains. And the eastern Nebraska or eastern deciduous woodlands reach their western extent in eastern Nebraska. And then along the Niobrara River Valley, they're all blended together. So we are prairie country, but we do have important native woodland species. In fact, 40 tree and shrub species reach their range limits in Nebraska. This includes western species reaching east and eastern species reaching west. Why does that matter? Those 40 species that we were talking about at the start of the program hold the genetic clues and the capacity for us to grow trees and landscape plants in our communities that have been on the plains for thousands of years, and they tolerate this climate. They're saying, plant me. So here's just a few examples of this. Western Nebraska, you go out on the Wyoming border, western Kimball County, there's the stand of limber pines that we talked about, the pine cones. We collected these right out of these trees, limber pines that are, some of them are 200, 300, 400 years old. One was dated to be 600 years old. Out in the Pine Ridge up near Chadron a few weeks ago, we were traipsing around Nebraska's tallest ponderosa pine, which is 110 feet tall. And down in a different draw, we came across, we were looking for these, but the western extent of bur oak in Dawson County. They're not supposed to be there. They don't read the maps, but they're native bur oak trees in there. We gathered the acorns and we're going to grow them up with some nursery partners and use them across Nebraska, especially western Nebraska. And then southeast Nebraska. This is hot off the presses. This was just yesterday. We were traipsing down this path of the Steamboat Trace Trail. If you've ever been in southeast Nebraska, just south of Nebraska City, you can take the Steamboat Trace Trail, an abandoned rail corridor from about the OPPD power plant down to Brownville. Do it. That's a long stretch of ground. Bring a tent with you, lots of snacks, because it's going to take several days to walk that far. Maybe take a bike. But boy, is it a fun trail this time of year. Vivid yellow colors. Here on the left is a scene where we have a rare tree, butternut. There's only 3 or 4 of these trees in this forest, and that's the only population of them in Nebraska. We were scouting for those, and they're growing within this little patch of pawpaw. Pawpaw is an eastern deciduous forest tree from the eastern U.S., sometimes called the Indiana banana. It has this fleshy fruit that's really good to eat. We grow them in eastern Nebraska, believe it or not. They're a tropical plant, butternut. And then this guy on the right is bitternut hickory. It was just festooned in this really bright, vivid yellow display yesterday in this dull fall color year. It just stood out, the bitternut hickory. If there's a tree you should plant more of, it is the bitternut hickory for sure. Next slide. But Nebraska is mostly prairie. At the time of settlement, there were less than 3% of the state as woodland. So mostly prairie. Now it's mostly farm ground with some remnant grasslands. But we have amazing prairie diversity. We have short grass prairie, mixed grass prairie, tall grass prairie, and all these biomes mixed together in central Nebraska. It's really neat to think about. And here's something to keep in mind. Right here in the Omaha area or Lincoln area, this was tall grass prairie. 99% of that is gone. We just have remnant patches. Well, the cool thing about this is our community landscapes can be a habitat that includes these vestiges of these prairie plants. It would be a wonderful thing to put more of them in our landscapes. Also, the prairie was the original carbon sink and stormwater sponge. When the rain came down, it did not come off in waves. Native plants bring native insects. This is the idea of the biodiversity that comes along with the native plants that were co-evolved with the insects and the birds that are found here. So we'll just look at a few of these examples and we'll fly through them. Here's the black swallowtail butterfly. It eats anything in the parsley family, including zizia, monarchs and milkweeds, regal fritillaries and violets. Different kinds of bees and bees mimics, like the mason bee, the leafcutter bee, the hoverfly is a bee mimic, and the bumblebee, really important pollinator insects. The vast majority of these insects are benign or very important to a healthy and sustaining landscape. Crab spiders, a praying mantid is such a fun little thing to get in your hands and just watch how it goes through life and to think, wow, that little guy is a part of my landscape. I love it. Keeping some of the non-wonderful bugs off my plants. Lacewing on the upper right, damsel bug. These are all really important insects that you can find right out your backyard in your landscape. These insects turn around and they're food for the birds. Man, I love to see what birds are flying around. This is just a few of them that I see in my yard from time to time. If you have good habitat in your yard, you're going to get a lot of birds. And believe it or not, this year was the first year I've been hearing a Carolina wren in the trees around the part of Waverly where I live. They're more of an eastern U.S. tree bird species, but I can hear them in my neighborhood now. And I think it's because we have more diversity in trees and things. And here's a few of our incredible Great Plains native plants, incredible Great Plains native plants. We'll just fly through these. Blue grama, side oats grama is native grasses, tough as nails. Little blue stem, our state native grass. It's out more in mixed grass prairie country, but this time of year with that wine colored red foliage is fantastic. Then we have taller grasses like prairie dropseed with this veiled look and a popcorn fragrance to it. Wow, is it a great native grass. And then we have switch grasses. Beware, some switch grasses are little things and some will grow up and eat the side of your house like that Dallas Blues switchgrass. But so much diversity, they get big and robust if you get them off to a good start. They're drought tolerant and they even tolerate wet periods pretty well. Switchgrass. Look at some of these cool wildflowers like pasque-flower, prairie smoke, prairie spiderwort. There's all kinds of purple coneflowers, believe it or not. There are 3 or 4 species we can grow here, including pale purple coneflower on the left, purple coneflower on the right. Milkweeds. They're a little hard to grow in the garden because they can be temperamental, but boy, are they important for monarch butterflies. One of the easiest, well, 2 of the easiest milkweeds to have are the whorled milkweed and the common milkweed. You won't plant those probably, they'll just show up. And when they show up, leave them, because if you try to plant them, they're probably gonna die. And add butterfly milkweed and swamp milkweed to your landscape and you'll be doing right for the monarch butterflies. There's other things like Missouri primrose and purple poppy mallow. Both of these are low ground covers. And just imagine that yellow blended with the whitened cup red of the purple poppy mallow. Fantastic ground cover. We have prairie plants that are easy to grow just from seed. And in fact, they will reseed around your yard. Purple prairie clover, brown-eyed Susans, and the prairie coneflower or the Mexican hat. Easy to grow. We're not going to spend a lot of time on, we got so many native plants to highlight here, so we can just give you a few to think about. Rough gayfeather, dotted gayfeather, and the prairie blazing star. We can grow 5 to 6 kinds of gayfeather in Nebraska. Baptisias, the blue dwarf indigo on the left, and on the right is Amsonia. I thought I had a different slide set here, but Amsonia gives us fall color on the right, and the blue Baptisia on the left. These are all regionally native prairie plants. How about wild quinine on the left? Not a great name for a plant that blooms its socks off in the heat of summer from July to August. A really cool plant. And then on the right is another indigo. This is the white wild indigo. Comes up with this tall spike of creamy white flowers midsummer that really is a knockout in the garden. Go ahead. Goldenrods. This is goldenrod time of year, and there's just a few species that you can throw in the landscape. I see fireworks goldenrod all over town. It kind of likes it wet. Here's one, the showy goldenrod that grows on the toughest, driest, rocky soils of western Nebraska. Aromatic aster. Combine goldenrods with asters and you'll have wonderful fall color every year. So there's different asters that we can grow. And then I mentioned a little while ago, these are plants for wet areas. So, and I mentioned already swamp milkweed. Here's something called Joe Pye weed. And here's something called sneezeweed. What the heck? You're gonna plant a weed, a milkweed, a Joe Pye weed, and a sneezeweed? Yeah, because they're not weeds. They're wonderful native plants to use in our landscapes, and they like it wet. Golden Alexanders is a good one. We talked a little bit about the black swallowtail butterfly. They love our zizias or golden Alexanders. On the right is Culver's root, Verona castrum. Look at these plants. You're telling me that they're not beautiful in any landscape or any garden just because they're native prairie plants? No, they're fantastic. And we have quite a few things we could throw in for shade, like bloodroot, Solomon seal, and columbine. All native, all easy to grow. Woodland phlox, spotted geranium, mayapple, and Dutchman's breeches. I have these all in my yard. If I can grow them, anybody can grow them. Now, we've touched a lot on native plants, and we love our native plants. We're going to sing the praises of native plants all the time. But like I mentioned a little bit ago, in the city, not every site is conducive to native plants because we don't have native soil. We have hot, dusty, dry parking lots and concrete edges and things like that. And sometimes there are non-native plants that fit the bill, like salvia, feather reedgrass, catmint, and sedum. Sedum is so easy to grow. The drier, the better for sedum. So if they're well-behaved non-natives, we can use them in our landscapes. And here's just a few more examples of how we combine native prairie plants into a traditional landscape. This is the Ferguson House in Lincoln, showing you all kinds of these same plants that we were just looking at a minute ago. Beatty Elementary in South Lincoln. The volunteer neighborhood person there, Karen Cresswell, is in this picture. She has planted and cared for that landscape for years. It's amazing. Aldersgate Garden in East Lincoln. We just had an event there last week. They're converting their whole landscape away from lawn to a nice mix of trees and shrubs and sustainable lawn kinds of activities. And they have a rain garden on the east side of their property. Next. Out in Chadron State College, they've interpreted the Sandoz Center with mixed grass sandhills area plants. Next. Wayne State College did the same kind of a thing, a tall prairie. In Johnson County down in the Olathe, Kansas area, their transit center for the community was this sterile fescue lawn with a few scattered trees, and they're restoring it to prairie. This is Wayne Park in Waverly, which I help care for and try to ride herd on. And if you see, look closely in this picture, that's Dutch white clover mixed into the lawn. We've planted trees and shrubs tightly together. We've got an understory of native Nebraska shade-tolerant plants. It can be done. This is Lawson Park in Waverly, where we just did a little prairie vignette, maybe 5,000 square feet of prairie along a path, and it works. And they look great this year with all our drought and dryness. The Waverly High School, here's a point of caution for you. We planted a native-inspired garden. We call it the Learning Garden right out in front of the school. It's kind of rough and wild, and they do not like it. So make sure you get people on board with you when you do these things. It takes a pretty good sales pitch to say, yeah, you know what? It doesn't look like Kew Gardens in London, but it looks like what a garden should look like in Waverly, Nebraska, if we're trying to conserve nature and do right by water and biodiversity and all those other things. So in summary, for more resilient landscapes, strive for greater biodiversity, starting with plant diversity. emphasize native plants and exclude invasive non-natives, improve and sustain soil health and practice nutrient recycling. This could be a whole presentation on itself. How do you improve soil health? The easiest thing to do is just relax about everything you're doing. Quit hauling all the lawn clippings away. Let stuff be, let it decompose and return to the soil. Rethink the lawn and reduce those negative lawn care impact issues. Be water wise, irrigate wisely and capture stormwater where we can. Plant more trees and native shrubs, number 6. The right tree in the right place, properly planted and managed. Don't just plant a tree and walk away. This year is telling us, you plant a tree, own that tree, take care of it, get it off to a really good start, and then it'll give us a lifetime of benefits next. And with that, let me wrap up by saying you can sign up for an email listserv, an email blast that I do about twice a week. It's called The Shady Lane. We do a woody spotlight, a woody plant spotlight. This was on buttonbush a year or so ago, but tomorrow I'm going to write about the bitternut hickory and those fall colors we saw yesterday. Just send me an email, jevertson1@unl.edu. And I'd be happy to add you to our Shady Lane listserv. We're going to give you all kinds of great information about trees and landscapes as part of the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum and the Nebraska Forest Service. And with that, I'll just remind you that we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. And that really pushes me forward, especially now that I have grandkids, thinking about what kind of a world are we leaving behind for them. Let's work together at this. What I like to tell people, this is America. We have our freedoms. We love to do things. We love to spend money and buy things and have nice houses and cars. I do too. That's part of being American, right? So that's okay that we can do all that. But we have to give back to the mothership a little bit too. So if you don't mind me preaching a little bit, to just say, yep, we have all these freedoms in America, but remember, a lot of responsibility must come along with those freedoms if we want to keep them for a long time. Part of that is doing right by our friends and neighbors around us, the mothership, planet Earth, the insects and the creatures around us. It all makes sense in the long run. I like to think that we can have our cake and eat it too if we're just smart about it and willing to confront the challenges we have. So with that, I'm done. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I love talking about trees and landscapes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Remind us.
That was awesome, thank you.
Really quick, I'm gonna launch our survey, but I do see a couple questions on here.
Okay.
Give me 1 second. No, that one. Okay,
Oh, is that what I need to do? CEU signups.
what signups?
We have CEUs for arborists. If
Oh,
anybody
cool.
is a certified arborist in the Nebraska Arborist Association or International Society of Arboriculture, you need to email me your name and your certification number, and I'll put you on this list.
Awesome. We have one that says, how do you scatter trees and landscapes?
How do you stagger?
Scatter, she said.
How do you scatter trees and landscapes? Okay, what I tried to convey, but I mumble a lot and it didn't come across well. Don't scatter trees. Plant them close together. Remember that here in Nebraska, it's windy. It's a tough environment. And if you go to any forest, even those western Nebraska limber pine trees, they all grow in kind of the shadow of each other. But just think what Mother Nature does. She puts trees 5, 10, 2, 3, 20 feet apart. And we should start doing that a little bit in our planted landscapes too. Plant our trees tight. If you have to, thin them later. They'll really help each other get off to a good start if we do that right. So don't scatter trees. Plant them tighter together in communal groupings. So like if we were going to plant trees in this room that's maybe 30 by 30 feet, what I would do is I'd probably plant 1, 2, 3, 4 trees, and I'd weave in between them some good native shrubs, low growing shrubs, to give them all this shared rooting space. So things like coralberry and snowberry or sand cherry or plum or gray dogwood, those things can all be blended with trees and they'll help each other grow. Does that make sense? Kind of a community of things.
And this is one other question you got. What size of trees should I plant? Is buying larger trees worth the extra cost?
Very good question. What size of trees? If you can stand to plant this acorn, I'll give it to you. And that's funny and we're kind of kidding. But some of the best trees I've had fun with are trees planted from acorns. I did a study once that we put out acorns and then we put another row of trees from a nursery that were in traditional containers. Then we put another row out of trees grown in grow bags. Those trees we planted as acorns, they were way bigger than the nursery trees 5, 6, 7 years later. They caught up and passed them. And now they're the trees that are still in that landscape. The trees that were in grow bags that had a healthy root system were just a little slower, but still good trees. But those trees in traditional containers with circling roots were problematic. That's a long way around to saying plant the smallest tree you can stand. If it's a seedling, go for it. If it's an acorn, go for it. If it's a 5 to 6 foot tall tree, go for it. Just make sure you get a good root system to come along with it. Because the bigger the tree you plant, the harder it is to bring a really good root system with it in that ball. Because remember, the root zone is usually as tall as the tree is, no matter what size the tree is. So the smaller, the better. But it's not, this is America. If you want to plant a 10-foot tall tree, 2 inches in diameter, go for it, but just get a really good root system.
Awesome.
Ask the nurseries.
I'm not seeing any other open questions right now, but I think hopefully you all saw his email address and can.
Yes, let
Yeah.
me know if you need CEUs. You're going to have to email jevertson1@unl.edu to get your CEUs.
Otherwise,
Thank
thanks
you,
for being
everybody.
here and have a good night.
Thanks again. That was wonderful. I
Thank you
appreciate
for
it.
coming.